so KrakCast Weekend is when we talk about other stuff. We leave our usual topic of Krakow news and Polish news and whatnot to just, get some variety in the game. Right, Dave?
Yes, variety.
That's the word I'm looking for.
There has been some discussion what constitutes a weekend and a discussion. We've had a extensive debate.
I thought it was a pretty clear.
This is classic
term.
KrakCast Weekend, though. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, we're going to go off topic this week and talk about something that's brought a little bit of cheer to us in this otherwise shitty year. Of course, I'm talking about the release of two entries in the latest generation of video game consoles, Microsoft and their Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation and their Sony and their PlayStation 5. It seems like Microsoft getting a little bit messy with their naming conventions here. Xbox 360, Xbox One, Xbox Series X. PlayStation 2, 3, 4, 5 is so much easier to understand, isn't it? Which one is the newest one? Anyway, and to
millions of parents worldwide are thankful.
This is true. And to help us out, we've brought in a friend of ours. Alan is a big video game enthusiast. He's going to come and actually, he's not going to come. He's already here. What am I talking about?
I am here.
He's right here. Alan, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little something about yourself before we dive into the world of video games here.
So I've been here in Krakow now for the last few years. Work in recruitment, same world that Dave does. And I've been brought in here to talk about video games and the very exciting last couple of weeks of the launch of new generations. Exciting times.
Okay, so I think technically this is the seventh generation of video games, right? And I was just reading a couple of days ago that COVID is just ruining everything this year. The actual launch, physically getting them into homes across the country and around the world, has been kind of affected by this. Now, as we speak here in Poland, as we record, I should say, we still have the ban on non-essential stores being opened, although I understand that's going to change next week. And so right now, getting a console is only possible online. Chaos, as far as I understand, in terms of supply meeting demand. Lots of people upset about their pre-orders not being filled. Lots of people waiting when they're probably going to keep waiting until after the holidays on their game consoles. But I understand you somehow, I don't know if you want to tell us exactly how, but you managed to get your hands on an Xbox.
Magical ways. But thankfully, Poland's made it way easier to get one of these consoles. The Xbox Series X or Series S, you could easily purchase right now and collect within a day from MediaMarkt. PlayStation 5 is way more difficult to get. Whether that's down to sales or whether it's down to supply and logistical issues that, of course, they've had from the COVID side, it's hard to say. But certainly from a more so global side, particularly the US and UK market, it is nigh impossible to get one of these consoles right now, and probably won't be until at least 2021, which have made people very, very angry and upset.
Yeah, I guess it'll work itself out eventually, I suppose, after, time will pass and we'll all be happy in the end, but kind of a bit of a rough start. Thanks again, COVID. All right, so which side of this divide do we want to start on? Well, I guess since you've already got your hands on the Xbox, why don't you tell us, we're talking about Series X, right? The pricier, more exclusive, faster, more badass version, right?
Yeah, because you mentioned there is confusing on names, and you got Series X, Series S.
Yeah, they should work that out. It's really messy, but
what's the difference?
So Series X is basically the more powerful version, and they've labeled as the most powerful console to ever be available, and it is extremely powerful. It's a very impressive machine. It's very pricey. It's standard $500 to get it, so it's not a cheap piece of product. But for what it brings to the market, it's unheard of for gaming to be that powerful a machine.
Which one did you go for?
I got the Series X. I couldn't get Series S because I think if I got it, I would feel like I'm missing out, not having the slightly more powerful version.
Let me just clarify one thing, Alan. You say the most powerful gaming. I know some PC gamers are listening to us and laughing right now.
Yes, I'm referring specifically to consoles.
Yeah, because they had those standards about 10 years ago, probably. Yes. So we're talking about console gaming, of course.
You're gonna have to explain. Not all of us are fluent in game. What's the beef between the PC boys and the console boys?
All right, let's keep this as brief as possible. So very broadly speaking, let's talk about the divide between PC gamers and consoles, right? Now with PC, playing on a computer, of course, and they have they can upgrade their components, their processor, their graphics card, their memory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the developers can make games that can take advantage of much higher standards because of that. Whereas once you buy a console, once you buy when you bought a PlayStation 2, the technical standards inside were pretty much set. It can have system updates, but they're set. Same with PS3, every generation, it's basically done. You got your processor, and that's your processor until as long as you have that machine. Whereas if you have a PC, you can switch pieces out and upgrade it. You can get better performance, better graphics.
Just as a casual observer of the gaming industry, I'm going to label it a different way. They're like the super nerds, and they take it too far. And there's something inherently with those kind of blocky keyboards they use and their big PCs. They just look like losers. Console gamers, I associate more with coming home from the pub and playing FIFA and, being a bit cooler.
That's pretty much, okay, it's a judgment.
I'm guessing you're not part of the PC master race.
It gets really complicated and very expensive to keep up with the PC side, because in order to keep the most up-to-date graphics,
ridiculous money on it.
It's crazy money. It really is.
But Dave's right when he says, generally speaking, the hardcore people are generally more PC people. Your casual gamers, not only, of course, but your mainstreamers are more console friendly.
They look down on you, admit it.
They do, absolutely. So, but I'm a console gamer myself. Alan, primarily a console guy as well.
Yeah, always console. Okay. PC confuses me. It's too.
All right, let's leave PC freaks behind us. All right, so we mentioned the Xbox has two versions. There's the Series X, which is the one you have, which has a disk drive, and the Series S, which is digital only. Now, I find this fascinating because PlayStation has the same kind of division in their offering. One day when we can get our hands on them, they have two versions. There's the bigger, better, more powerful version where you can put your discs into it, and then there's the digital only version, right, where you can only access games online and download them to a hard drive, right? This to me is evidence that your Sony and Microsoft and your game studios are really trying to cut out the retail end of things. They're tired of losing 20, 30%, whatever, to your media markets of the world, and they would love to sell to us directly, and that means, digital games instead of games on disc. I'm also, at the same time, I'm skeptical if this is going to work. I'm curious. I'm really going to follow this, but I think in 2 years, when they make tough decisions about which consoles are going to survive and which are going to disappear, I think those two lower end digital only consoles are going to go.
I have another one of my stupid questions. Aren't video games massive files? What size would
we'll get to that in a second, but they're getting bigger. Your modern games are easily over 100 gigabytes sometimes, but that has a bearing on how much disk space you have, which is another variable.
You'll answer my question in a minute.
Yeah. Maybe we might get back to you, Alan. What do you make about what do you make of these digital only consoles?
Well, they're really interesting because when the last generation launched, when Microsoft was pitching up for its Xbox One, they had a conference and they were stating that the Xbox One is unique in that they were aiming for more of a digital world and that they wanted to push digital sales, stay away from the disc side, and that was met with criticism from every single pretty much gamer in the world, where they were like, no, we want our discs, we want to be able to share discs with our friends, we don't want digital, what for those who don't have strong internet connection. And really that actually affected Microsoft's race in the last generation, because the PS4 ended up selling a lot more than the Xbox One did, and a lot of that was down to very mixed messaging from the beginning. And the irony of it now is that actually Microsoft were looking like they were right years ago when they said we are aiming for more digital, because now you have digital versions of both versions of Sony and Microsoft. The digital side, it's very cliche to say, but that I think is the future of gaming, which is a really awful sentence to say. But the digital side is just way more to it, because the money goes straight to developers. You cut that middleman, the retailer side. But of course, your retailers, so your MediaMarkt, your GameStop, your Game, they don't want this to happen, because especially on the second-hand side of things, of buying games used, they make so much money. Actually, all the money goes back to the stores when you buy a game, second-hand. So the digital side is interesting, and we're definitely stepping more towards that. And I think that perhaps the next generation is when you'll see a digital only and even getting rid of the disc side, because that tends to be what the market is saying in terms of being more popular.
This reminds me a lot of a similar conversation going on with Hollywood and distribution of films, because the technology is that the infrastructure is there. Hollywood can sell films directly to us, which is what they really want to do, because when you go to Cinema City, those exhibitors are getting a big cut of the money that we pay to see a film, right? And so, it's obvious to Hollywood that they should just sell directly to us. Maybe we could pay a little bit less. Everybody wins except for the exhibitors, right? And they step forward. They say, hey, wait a second, what about us, right? And so you have this kind of weird combination of the modern technology and what you might call a legacy distribution system at, fundamentally at odds. it seems that they really can't get along. You either have to have one or the other. I don't know. You see the parallel there? Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think actually COVID has kind of fast-tracked movie distributors' thoughts on what digital only looks like. So you're seeing new movies now go straight to streaming services. You're looking at Wonder Woman now, which has been recently announced that they're going to put it out on Christmas Day on both cinemas and straight to HBO Max as well. Right. I'd be interested what the numbers look like. Now, of course, COVID skews that because people are more home, so they're more, I suppose, willing to spend money on watching a movie at home first day. Be interested to see once COVID's kind of restrictions go away, will people lean towards more digital straight at home or want the cinema experience? It's tough to say.
I think it'll be a long time dying the cinema because it's shown to be a durably profitable model. The super hero movie, especially, you can make one for 200 million and make 2 billion back. Like, I mean, these are some massive. All right, 2 billion is an extreme example, but they generally make 4 or 5 times their budget, and as long as they keep doing that.
Talking about the digital distribution of films and going back to Dave's question about the file sizes, games are huge now, especially your AAA games. I think the new Call of Duty is something like 120 gigs or something like that. I mean, it's crazy. Red Dead Redemption 2 was, I think, around 90 gigs, something like that. Take a long time to install. Now, this has a connection to the amount of space that you have, right? Now, in this new generation on both Xbox and PlayStation, their big selling point is the transition to an SSD, right? Much, much faster hard drive and processing data. Now, these SSDs, their convenience and their power, they kind of come at the compromise there is the size, is the capacity, right? Previous generations, it wasn't a problem. I think wasn't there a PlayStation model that had a 2 terabyte hard drive? Am I imagining that? There was one terabyte for sure. Anyway, in this current generation, I think the new PlayStation, the PlayStation 5 has an SSD of 850 gigs, which once you account for the operating system is down to I think 667 gigs, right? 60. That's about 5 or 6 current AAA games. That is nothing. Isn't it easy to imagine people bumping up against the limits of their hard drive, 6 weeks after they take it out of the box?
Well, that's the interesting with the Series S because that's obviously even less memory available.
Yeah, I think it's 500 gigs, I think.
500 gigs. You remove then the OS side, you then have less to play around with.
That's crazy.
300 and some gigabytes. And if you want to buy an additional hard drive for it, you can. But if you put an additional hard drive
it's crazy expensive, though, isn't it?
It really is. Because if you want to buy a dedicated SSD, those things cost like $200 as a terabyte. So really, if you buy a Series S, then buy an SSD, you're now matching the price of the Series X. So you could argue, why not just buy the Series X in the first place?
Right.
Can you add on storage? I mean, I have a little music player that can take a terabyte.
Well, you can. For example, on the PS5, as I understand it now, maybe this will be changed in the future with a system update, but you can connect a USB 3, for storage purposes, but you cannot play from them. In other words, the game that you're playing has to be on that SSD. And so what you'd have to do is that you could store it on the external USB and then move it, transfer it over to the SSD and play it from there.
Which doesn't take that long. The transfer is way quicker than would be just actually install it from nothing. But really, the SSD is a huge, I think, selling point for the next gen because how quick everything is. So loading times, installation, it's far, far quicker than it was in the previous gen, to the point where that's probably the thing I felt most next gen with the Series X is how quickly things load and how quickly you can jump into the game. It's crazy.
That's the big selling point. Apart from the graphical update, which we'll talk about in a second, the big selling point here is how easy it is to get things started, to boot up and start playing, and to switch from one game to another. Dr. Mike?
Yeah, I was about to say exactly with the SSD drive, and this is the main selling point with the PlayStation 5, was that they were arguing with their new controller and their setup, then they can use the SSD almost as like RAM in the actual game, where everything is loading on the fly, back and forth. So, going through levels, going through large, expansive worlds, you won't even get that hiccup. You won't get that loading screen. And that's what they're arguing is the main selling point when it comes to the PlayStation 5.
Let me get a quick word in here about the design, the appearance of these consoles. Let's stick with the Series X, because it's very different physically from the Series S and the PlayStation 5. PlayStation 5, really big.
Yes,
really big.
Massive. Yes.
And very tall, to be specific, when you're putting it in its upright position. And it's got this kind of a very different black and white appearance. It's got some curves in there, which is unusual for a PlayStation. The Series X has this Tower of Sauron kind of quality to it. It's kind of odd. What do you make of how the new consoles look?
The Series X, I like how it looks. It's quite sleek. It just looks like a hard drive. It's a big black box. It has a ventilation system on top, which has got slight green coloring to represent kind of the Microsoft Xbox side. It does look good. It is very big, but that's to be expected for how powerful it is. The PS5 is massive, and it's also awkwardly shaped. It has this weird, like, angelic wing plastic on the top. It's also white, which is quite interesting because this is the first, I believe, kind of major console launch that isn't just black. That tends to be the go-to color for consoles. So aesthetically, it does stand out in your living room, and it looks, you can't miss the thing. But also, it's hard to fit it anywhere. Like most kind of TV stands won't have a space to sit in.
Exactly.
So it's kind of almost awkward to sit here behind the TV or on the floor.
I was just thinking that it's very tall, isn't it?
Very tall, yeah.
It's horrendous.
And as Alan says, I mean,
it looks like an industrial router or something.
Most people's furniture, like your TV kind of, entertainment center kind of thing, is just not made for this. It's just way too big.
No, my Series X doesn't fit in my entertainment center. It can't fit in the, like, where you usually put a console in. So I have it, like, awkwardly sitting beside the TV. Now, it doesn't really stand out because it's black, has a small white power button, so you don't really notice it. But the PS5, eventually when I do get it, it will stand out because it's huge.
It seems
kind of like one of those Sentry bots from Portal. Am I the only one who kind of sees that?
Oh, yeah, the color scheme especially, yeah.
The remote control looks amazing, though. How come you didn't get a new remote in your one, Alan? That Xbox one looks a bit like the same old one.
Well, the Xbox is pretty much a slight iterative of what they've done before. And I guess what Microsoft are going for was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which I actually agree with.
It feels very good in your hands, the Xbox controller.
It really does. And I think with the new Series
X, ergonomics.
Yeah,
it does a good ergonomics. It's got it's got a grip on the shoulder buttons in the back. It feels good in your hands, but it's not a big leap from before. The PS5's big next gen selling point is their controller.
It looks amazing, man.
It is.
Well, it's a little less angular than conventional PS controllers. I think Xbox controllers do feel better in your hand. I prefer the PlayStation controller because the Xbox has the offset sticks, which I'm not a fan of. Whatever. But on that subject, Alan, the PlayStation controller has got what is apparently, I haven't played it with it myself, what is apparently an absolute game changer when it comes to immersion for the player.
Yes, the controller is, I think, the biggest differentiator and the most next gen you can get right now. I was lucky because a friend of mine has it and I was playing with it. And the thing with this controller is that usually with controller you have kind of standard rumbles. So if you get shot in a game or shoot a gun, your controller will shake basically. And you've had that for years and years, the rumble side of things. It's basically, it's the same technology that's in, if you go to like a restaurant, you get one of those buzzers for your food. Right. That sensor is the same thing that's in pretty much all controllers. The PlayStation instead, this new controller has a very adaptive rumbling that, for example, if you shoot a very big gun, it's harder to pull down the trigger. It's a weird thing to describe.
Haptic feedback.
The haptic feedback, yeah, that's the one. And like I initially thought that sounded quite gimmicky. It's just like you're never going to avail of it.
It's like a snap nearly. You can feel
You can really feel the weight.
I guess there are degrees of rumble and degrees of resistance, especially as one of the games. Now, this is a game I will never play in my life. The NBA 2K. I will never ever play that game. However, I saw this really clever use of the trigger mechanic here. Whereas in previous games, you would just hold down the trigger to sprint. Okay, that's old news. We're, nothing special about that. Now, with the haptic feedback, as your character, as the player you're controlling becomes more tired, sprinting becomes more difficult, so there's more resistance to pulling that trigger back.
Yeah.
And again, just a small thing when you describe it that way, but when you're immersed in the game, it does more again to kind of, engage you. And these are the little things I think that developers going forward, as they put more effort into kind of taking advantage of this capability, they're going to find new ways to exploit that and new ways to kind of draw you into the game, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's a good point because with that new controller, you won't really see, I think, the full kind of benefit of that for probably at least 2 years, because at the moment with both Microsoft and Sony, they have said that they're still going to support the previous generation for probably a year or two. So any big studio that's making a game that's not just for a Series X, because they have to kind of almost make it for an Xbox One as well, you could argue they have to compromise for it because they can't just focus purely on technology available.
I'm kind of Googling stuff as you mentioned it. This NBA game, the graphics are unbelievable.
We will not talk about NBA games, Dave.
There's some still photographs here. They look...
Go play it. I don't care.
Like photography. It's unbelievable.
That's probably the biggest showcase for graphics. Like, you actually see sweat dripping off a player's face while they're running. Like, well, it's crazy.
Just the reflections of light on the court and things like that.
Yes. Ray tracing.
The ray tracing, yes.
Let's get into that for a second. Let's get into graphics generally. First of all, ray tracing I think this is, again, old news for PC people. new for gamers. It's basically a more realistic, faithful recreation of the behavior of light.
Yeah.
Especially with reflective surfaces, right? That's what ray tracing is all about. And it just adds a new layer of realism and authenticity to environments and everything. So, it's a quantum leap forward. It's a big deal, right? It comes at the expense of frame rate, I believe. I think you have a choice of either a high frame rate for a smooth picture or a lower frame rate with a more detailed, ray tracing environment. But that's all I know. If you know more about that, Alan, you can jump in on that point. But I think that's basically what I know about ray tracing. But I want to ask you about the graphics here, because let me back up. The difference between PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 was huge. The difference between PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, big but not as huge. And now, and the same thing applies to the Xbox evolution. My point is, we're getting smaller incremental jumps between generations when it comes to graphics. Are we reaching some kind of, max graphic situation where people are going to be less and less impressed with each successive generation of graphical improvements?
100%. I mean, like the last few kind of games you would have seen with the PS4, last major games for example, like The Last of Us Part 2 was an extraordinary looking game, looked beautiful, played super smooth, and you can't imagine how that could look in theory better. But really, I think for this new consoles that we have now, it's not necessarily how they look, but also how they play. And the biggest thing is frames per second.
I want to know what you're playing. What have you got loaded in the disc tray, or lack thereof?
So for the Series X, the big thing I'm playing at the moment is the new Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
I've watched my mates play that. That's a fucking awesome game, man.
It is really good.
Stabbing people in the neck and shit. Tell us about it.
Well, and the thing with Assassin's Creed is that it's one of the few games that actually is optimized for the new gen. So, for example, in Series X, comparison to Xbox One, the Assassin's Creed plays at 60 frames per second, and in previous generations, it's 30 frames per second. And that is a massive difference because it's just much smoother to play. It's a buttery performance. Load times are basically non-existent. Fast traveling is actually fast. So if you go from one side of the map to the other, it takes like maybe 3 or 4 seconds. And I remember in the last Assassin's Creed, which came out 2 years ago, if I fast traveled in the map, genuinely about a minute and a half, you'd wait until you're actually back in the game.
What's your preferred method of assassination from behind?
Well, with this one's a bit weird because you're supposed to be this barbaric Viking that is super violent, and then the game is trying to push you to be more stealthy, which is kind of anti-Viking. It's kind of a weird oxy. You kind of look at
Viking's not subtle, I guess, at all.
No, and like the game
sounds like a kind of Hollywood comedy take on Assassin's Creed. What's going on? Like, have the developers gone a bit crazy here? Doesn't he prance along walls?
They're running out of like mythologies and like cultures to put into the game right now. So
yeah, he just panicked, said Vikings. We haven't done that yet. That'll do, because this is now the 13th, I think, main series.
Yeah, give it a rest. Assassin's Creed, come on, give it a rest.
Yeah, because it used to be a yearly iteration, and they've kind of spread out to 2 years, which has, I think, helped in terms of because these games are like almost too long, which I think is actually a problem for a lot of modern games that they're too big, because Assassin's Creed is easily a 100+ hour game if you want to do even a good chunk of what is available. And I think that's really good if you have the time to do that. But I want to kind of move on to what is, I think, the biggest sample from the Microsoft side, which is this Game Pass. That for me is the most, even though it was part of last gen, I think this is their biggest push that they're going for. And Game Pass is essentially almost works like a Netflix subscription. So you pay 40 zloty a month, €10 a month, and you have access to a catalog of about 120 odd games that you can just install and play right away.
Classic titles. Give us a flavor.
It's a mixture of new titles. So you have things that anything that Microsoft has made. So Gears of War, Halo, any of their kind of first party development is available on Game Pass, and then a mixture of third party as well, and some indie games too. And I think with Microsoft, they're pushing more and more towards Game Pass as their future, because this year they also purchased ZeniMax, which is the corporation who owns Bethesda, for $7.5 billion.
ZeniMax and Bethesda, they have awesome names in the video game world.
They do. But with that means that they now own the property of Fallout, of Elder Scrolls, of Doom, of Wolfenstein. They're now Microsoft properties. So if they wanted to, which I don't think they would, they could now have any future game of Bethesda just on a Microsoft console plus PC, because they're always usually on both. I don't think they'll do that, but they can.
I think PlayStation has got their own plans for the equivalent of Game Pass. They see how successful it is. They see what a hit it is among players, and they're behind on this particular one, but they'll catch up for sure.
People are conditioned for that model at the moment.
Streaming subscription services. You mentioned what did you mention? It made me think of the launch lineup. Now, let's be honest here. The launch lineup for both is very thin, I would say. Deeply unimpressive. We've got the Spider-Man on the Sony. That's an exclusive. We'll talk about that in a second, too. Spider-Man's an exclusive there. A remake of Demon Souls. Yeah. On the Xbox side, I think, what's the big... Is there an exclusive on the Xbox side? Assassin's Creed is not...
There's literally nothing.
It's not an exclusive.
I'm looking here online. It says Cold War, Call of Duty.
That's not an exclusive, though. The
Xbox has nothing. The launch is nothing.
Yeah, the just across the board, I don't know how they let this happen. I mean, this has been on the development board for 2 or 3 years. November 2020, let's have a killer title ready to go, and I just don't see it.
Well, that was going to be Halo Infinite, and then it got delayed. They had issues. So Halo Infinite, they had a gameplay trailer a couple of months ago, and it was so badly received by the community because it didn't look that great. It looked... like graphically speaking, performance-wise, it looked okay, but nothing that would blow you away. And they got a lot of criticism. And then there's also more and more stories coming out that numerous directors have changed, that they keep changing their kind of priorities. And now that's been delayed until unconfirmed date of 2021.
I think the gap is closed, but Xbox has always been the kind of the Pepsi to Sony's Coca-Cola.
Can I ask one of my stupid questions again? What would the budget be on a game like that? Because I'm fascinated by this. These have become the big new productions of the modern world. I just want to dwell on the size of these games. Sorry.
Well, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is made by thousands of people across Ubisoft globally.
Like a 3-year production time.
It's crazy, the money involved, but they make that money back.
Would you?
I mean,
if only you had some powerful tool right on your lap that would tell you something like that.
From what I understand, AAA games can go for over $100 million. Plus, you have to remember marketing as well as another.
Yeah, some of them have Hollywood blockbuster style budgets.
Video
really,
games are making more money. It's a big industry.
They do.
Right now, so.
Yeah.
But let me go.
$125 million.
Yes, that's a Hollywood blockbuster budget. And let me go back to my question about exclusive. I forgot where I got cut off here. So Microsoft is closing the gap, but they've always, what did I say? They've been to Pepsi to PlayStation's Coca-Cola. And one of the reasons PlayStation has been dominant for a decade or more is exclusives. You've got your Uncharted, your God of War. What else is it? Ratchet and Clank, any number of IPs. On the Microsoft side, you've got your Halo for what it's worth. I'm not a big Halo fan myself. Gears of War, maybe some lesser known titles. Why can't, with all their cash in the bank, why can't Microsoft do something about that? I know the acquisition of Bethesda is part of this, but they know this is the problem. They've known it for 10 years or more. Why does it seem they still lag behind when it comes to killer games exclusive to their console?
It's a really tough question. I mean, they have been smart with acquisitions, so not just ZeniMax, Bethesda, but also they bought Obsidian. I think that was a year or two ago, which was a good purchase because they're a very sound developer. They're also buying kind of smaller companies as well, and rumors are they're now trying to invest more in the Japanese market, which they've always struggled in, notoriously, and probably will continue to struggle.
I think they're almost a non-factor in Japan, as weird as that is, 20 years after jumping in the game.
Yeah, I think Japan's the only market that have actually said the sales units of the PS5 and Series X, Series S. And for the PS5, it's been, for the first 4 days, around 120,000 units sold, and for Xbox Series S, Series X, around 20,000 units sold, which is not really a surprise, and that says nothing really in the grand scheme of things.
There were rumors about 6 months ago that Microsoft was here in Poland shopping around, talking to CD Projekt Red. Yeah, good luck with that. Techland, some other smaller developers. I mean, again, I just don't get it. They know that this is their Achilles heel with gamers. They know PlayStation has hit after, Last of Us. They have hit after hit after hit when it comes to exclusives. And they've done very little, in my view, to do anything about it. It's just very confusing, I think.
Apart from buying things, that seems to be their tactic at the moment. I mean, they have Halo and Gears of War, which are very high-selling properties. I'm not a huge fan of them myself, but they are big sellers, and they are very important to them as IPs. But remove those two, top of my head, I think you struggle to come up with kind of another major sell. Whereas you said with Sony, they have your Uncharted, Last of Us, they have even a Ghost of Tsushima, which is a new IP that dropped this year, which has sold incredibly well.
I mean, if they've had a failure, I can't think of it off the top of my head when it comes to exclusives. I'm sure there's something in there that was disappointing. But I mean, again, Uncharted is just killer. Even if they never make an Uncharted game, that in my book is enough to get a PlayStation to go back and play those previous 4 or 5 games. God of War, that'll go on forever, I think. Now, Last of Us, I imagine we'll do another one of those. Ratchet and Clank, I think, was maybe originally planned for a launch title. There's a new Ratchet and Clank coming up fairly soon, I believe.
Yeah, like Rift Through Time.
Rift Through Time, exactly. Yeah.
I think it was meant to be for launch window. They never kind of explicitly you said, will make it for day one. I think they've always kind of said there's going to be Demon's Souls.
I almost get the feeling this is almost like a soft opening, a soft launch for both consoles.
I think it usually is. I think people look back on launch windows of previous generations with like rose-tinted glass. I remember back in the day when those launch came out, but usually it's maybe one great game for it. I think Microsoft are really lacking Halo Infinite. And even when I got the Series X and brought it home, on the back of the box, it says "Power Your Dreams," and it's a big picture of Master Chief looking at me saying, "You can't play my new game." And like, that's amazing. I can't wait till when you eventually come out in 2021. But obviously they produced that way before the delays came out, and but I think it was a big move for them to actually delay it.
The launch is going to be spread out over 2 or 3 years. I mean, I'm a big gamer. Eventually, I will get both of these, and I have no plans on buying them until probably Christmas of next year. So it's going to spread. I think there are millions of people just like me that are excited about it, but not now. It's just not a good time. Dave?
I'm just looking at your favorite game here, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. Chloe Fraser and Nadine Ross taking on these.
But that's not the Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 are that's where you want to look. And Uncharted, it's an artistic masterpiece, really a creative masterpiece, a storytelling masterpiece. The original Uncharted, I think, is 2007, and it still stands up today. That game is amazing even today.
I got the remastered because I got like the box set of all 3 just before Uncharted 4 came out.
The best steal ever in gaming, for sure. Alan, I want to go back and I want to ask you about something else. Let's go back to the subject of graphics, right? We agree there's almost like an arms race. Every generation has to impress with these amazing graphics. Gamers, spend a lot of money on these machines in the expectation they're going to have this incredible experience. I kind of see a bad side to that. I see games that kind of put an overemphasis on photorealism and whatnot in the graphic experience at the expense of gameplay. There are great-looking games that suck, or great-looking games that are kind of whereas... this is where I'm going to drag Nintendo into things here. I'm a huge Nintendo fan. Nintendo still has PS3 graphics, but they have the most amazing games because they focus on gameplay. So do you see that? I mean, would you agree that the graphics are kind of taking center stage at the expense of gameplay elements?
Yeah, because I think there's always a criticism that if a game doesn't look as photorealistic as it should be, it's automatically a bad game, which makes absolutely no sense.
That's crazy.
The same thing with Halo Infinite. When that gameplay trailer was released, I thought it looked pretty good. It didn't look visually that great, but it looked super smooth. They're aiming for 120 frames per second, which is great for a shooter. But everyone was like, this should be next gen. This should blow my mind. This should be photorealistic. And it's like, is that really what you want? Like, do you want to look so beautiful that it has to compromise on other factors? Or would you rather just play a very solid, fun game that looks great, but maybe doesn't look outstanding? And I think that's always a demand from consumers, that they want the most prettiest thing to kind of show off the console itself. And that was a struggle for me with the new Xbox. That Assassin's Creed Valhalla looks phenomenal, but aside from that, I was just playing small indie games in Game Pass. And my partner looked at the TV and was like, "This is the new gen." I'm like, "No, it looks prettier. It can, I promise." But
but they're fun. You have more fun playing those games. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, most of my time I've been playing Tetris on Game Pass, and like, it's Tetris.
You can't get more old school than that.
But it's just super fun, and it just looks nice.
Exactly.
But like, it's not.
There is something funny about going out and buying a machine of that power and playing Tetris on your.
I know,
and your big plasma.
One step above Pong.
But again, that's the weird thing. People think everything is about graphics, and that leads the game developers to put all the emphasis on their time and money and resources into making something that looks awesome, but again, it's not fun to play. And I think that also feeds into another phenomenon we're seeing, another parallel with Hollywood, where there's a conservatism that takes over because every game has to be a hit. You can't spend $100 million on a game and have it be a flop, right? So that means being safe. That means kind of, sequels to existing IPs, fewer risks, another Call of Duty, another fucking FIFA and Madden. God, I hate those games. I hate FIFA and Madden so much.
I hate FIFA too. Put me off games.
It's horrible.
All of my mates playing FIFA, I was terrible at it, and I used to just sit there and hate computer games.
But you just very rarely see something new and different, and instead we're seeing lots of sequels and remakes and remasters and everything else.
Yeah, and as you said, same with Hollywood as well. I mean, it's so rare that a studio will take a risk on a brand new or a director's new project or something that doesn't look commercially safe.
Too much money at stake.
It really is. That's the thing. Like, this is crazy cash is involved, and if a studio has a relative flop in comparison to its usual portfolio, it could put them on their knees. And there are numerous stories that studios have like lasted because of the success of one particular game. They managed to just hit well. Maybe they released at the right time. But like if it does flop, it can be a huge concern. I mean, BioWare is a good example of that. They were on a huge high when they made the Mass Effect trilogy. Everyone was in love with them. They were selling well. Everything was great. Then they made Mass Effect Andromeda, and all went a bit wrong. And since then, they haven't really recovered. They made Anthem, which sold horrifically badly, I should say. And they haven't really recovered from that since. And they were at one stage a darling studio. So it can go wrong. And that's why I think companies take fewer and fewer risks because of that. But that's why I think you're seeing this big emergence of indie games that are smaller, like $10, $15 to buy. They're made by smaller studios, maybe dozens of employees, and they tend to sell, in comparison to how much they cost, extremely well.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas Assassin's Creed, your Red Dead, GTAs, they're 100 million plus easily. But you know they're going to sell, even if it doesn't review well.
Yeah, I'm crapping on the whole idea of remakes and sticking with safe bets and sequels. And I say this as someone who will be the first in line to buy GTA 6.
Oh, gotcha.
No matter what.
And Nintendo do that as well, right? I mean,
well, that's true, but Nintendo, I mean, it's kind of apples and oranges when it comes to Nintendo games.
Are they sequels in a way more than?
I had this kind of feeling that they had their big moment with the Wii and they've slipped back now. Is that accurate?
No, not at all. Switch is a massive hit, and deservedly so. Switch is a massive, massive hit, and the library that are built, first party, of course, Nintendo properties, is extremely impressive. I mean, nobody equals Nintendo when it comes to level design, artistic sense, and just fun. It's a different audience. Again, apples and oranges, but...
Alan, where do you stand on Nintendo?
I mean, I think they're an extraordinary company, and the Switch is one of my favorite consoles I've ever owned. And I think Nintendo, as you mentioned, Dave, like when the Wii came out, they were on an absolute high. That sold so well. It was so hard to get one.
Loved the Wii.
And both Xbox and PlayStation copied the concept.
Yes, yeah, because Xbox had their Kinect, which, relatively speaking, flopped. PlayStation tried PlayStation Camera, which again...
PlayStation Move.
Oh, Move, yeah, the wand. God, that was
we used to play bowling drunk when we came back from the pub, and I'll never forget one time at Christmas, Malty in his socks sprints up to take his bowling shot, slides, goes straight through the Christmas tree, takes the whole thing down all over the TV, everything was
Christmas memories.
I don't have that on my Series X. I don't have drunk bowling in my apartment. I just have Tetris. That's my life now.
But no, Switch. But then since you have Switch, Alan, you understand what I mean when I say that it's simple, but it just connects with you on a different level than these mega awesome games on the other consoles.
Yeah, I think Nintendo just carved their own audience for themselves. They almost don't compete or compare with anything. They're just Nintendo, and they've done an incredible job at that.
Whatever happened to Sega?
The developer now.
Yeah, I had a Mega Drive, my first console as a kid, and I loved that console so much. I play Sonic, Streets of
Rage,
Golden
Street
Axe.
Fighter 2.
So much fun. I think they got too ambitious because the Dreamcast pretty much killed them as a console maker. Because Dreamcast was, at the time, extremely expensive and very ambitious. It flopped, and then they shifted to just being a developer of not so many great games.
Can I ask one more? How many consoles between you do you currently own? Like, I mean, how many? It sounds like he's buy every one that comes out. I mean, add them up between you two, John. How many?
Like active that I actually play, or like
machines
in the back of the closet?
Consoles in the back of the closet.
Oh God. Oh, God.
All together.
You have a pen and paper. Could be here a while.
That's fascinating to me. Like the actual machines themselves.
Well, I've got a couple that I'll never touch. I'll never play. I'll tell you the ones that are active. Is Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox One. Although Xbox One, I don't play very much at all.
No, yeah. In terms of active, I have the main three, but I would have. So I've always had. I have each iteration of PlayStation, of Xbox, of Nintendo, apart from the old school. So I don't have a NES.
You've got like 20 of these things.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, home and my parents' attic.
About 20. You could have up to 50
I don't know about that.
of these.
I had my NES hooked up until a few months ago when, wife said basically it's taking up too much room and I wasn't playing it that often, so it's back in the parents' attic. But yeah, I remember. You never had an NES?
No, I was a Sega kid and a Sony kid. I got Nintendo quite late because I remember Resident Evil 4 came out. That was exclusive for the GameCube.
Best game ever.
Incredible game. And that made me get a GameCube because I was such a diehard Resident Evil.
That's the kind of games we don't see today. The ones you have to buy the console because you have to play that game. Yep. Very few of those games today.
GoldenEye back on the N64.
Yeah, that was a big deal too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One more question now before we get you out of here. We all know that eventually one day there's going to be a pro version and a slim version and a smaller, better, faster version. I'd say the minimum 2 years, probably 3 years away. They have to make their money on the current version before we move on. Do you think that if you had to give some advice to somebody who's on the fence, would you say you need to jump in with this launch model or sit and wait until it's cheaper and better in the future? It's a tough question.
It's
I know.
tough because, I mean, if someone really wants the optimized version of games available now, then buying a Series X is a good investment for that because you know...
Investment, he says.
It is
That's how we look at it. It's an investment, honey.
Your missus isn't here. You don't have to call it an investment.
I had to get it. I saved money by buying 2 of them.
But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It really depends. I mean, if you're really a Sony person, you love their PlayStation Studios, you want their first property, then PlayStation's great because those games will not be on on PC. Whereas Xbox, their exclusive will be on PC as well. Right now, I wouldn't recommend either because nothing really you have to play for you're missing out on, per se.
Yeah.
But if you have the money for it, you want to optimize, by all means, just...
Well, that's the thing. It's going to be more tempting as the lineup gets more impressive. Once that next badass God of War comes out, for example, when that great Ratchet and Clank comes out, when whatever Microsoft finally comes up with, when that comes out, you're going to say, Cyberpunk 2077.
If that ever gets released. Because it has gone through 28 delays.
Yeah, it's supposed to come out, next month, isn't it?
10th of December.
And I think stupidly enough, I feel so stupid about that. GTA 5 is supposed to be, GTA 5, the 2013 game, is supposed to be remastered for PlayStation 5. And I don't think I can call myself a man if I don't have it in my home, Alan.
I criticize, the GTA 5 again, I'm buying that day one. Of course I am.
Yeah, of course I am.
Why would I not?
Duh.
Even though it's like, that game is now going to span across 3 generations, which is actually incredible that's done that.
No problem. I'll get it.
Still playing it,
so that means I have to have the console, so maybe I will get it before I plan. I don't know. Well, if you can get your hands on a PlayStation 5, good luck. Let us know. Xbox seems to be a little easier to find for whatever reason. Or maybe you don't care at all. I don't know. But if you've listened to this, if you've listened this far, you must have some interest in gaming. So anyway, let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks, Alan, for joining us. Come back and talk about games sometime, will you?
Absolute pleasure, and I will.
KrakCast.pl is the site. Go there for all of our back episodes. Almost 300 episodes, unbelievably. Go to our site, hit the donate button. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time on the KrakCast.